After we announced my pregnancy, my sister-in-law's plan to humiliate me at my husband's party backfired, landing her in jail and a divorce. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. Jamie's body hit the ground with a sickening thud, his chair toppling over as he convulsed violently. Gasps filled the backyard as guests shot to their feet in shock. Alexandra froze, her plate clattering onto the table as she tried to process what was happening. Someone screamed, "Jamie! Someone call an ambulance!" Harry was already moving, shoving his way through the panicked crowd to reach his brother-in-law. Jamie's eyes were wide, his face turning a sickly shade of red, his throat visibly swelling. His hands clutched at his neck, fingers clawing at his skin as he struggled for air. Alexandra's stomach twisted. The plate, her plate. Her blood turned ice cold as realization struck. That food was meant for her. She was supposed to be the one choking, gasping, suffocating on the ground. The baby inside her and Harry's child, was supposed to be in danger. And Kayla had served it to her. A wave of nausea crashed over her, and she gripped the edge of the table for support. Kayla had handed her that plate with a smile, saying she wanted to make amends. But Kayla knew. She had always known about Alexandra's allergy. Yet there the shrimp had been, nestled among the other food, hidden just enough that she wouldn't have noticed until it was too late. Unless Jamie hadn't taken the plate first. The chaos around her blurred as a sharp voice broke through. "We need to get him to the hospital. Now!" Harry was barking orders, his usual calm shattered as he helped lift Jamie's seizing body into the arms of two guests who rushed him toward the driveway. The screech of tires echoed as someone sped off, hopefully toward the nearest emergency room. Silence settled over the crowd. Then Alexandra turned. Kayla stood near the back, stiff as a statue. Her face was unreadable, but Alexandra caught the slight twitch of her fingers, the way her eyes darted left and right as if she were debating whether to run. It was enough. Alexandra's pulse roared in her ears as she stepped forward. "You poisoned me," she whispered. Kayla's head snapped toward her, feigning innocence. "What? Don't be ridiculous. You knew." Alexandra's voice wavered, but her rage surged stronger than her fear. "You knew I was allergic. You knew what shrimp would do to me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guests, once buzzing with confusion, were now focused entirely on them. Even Harry, still reeling from the sight of Jamie being taken away, turned sharply at his wife's words, his face twisted with disbelief. "Kayla," he said, his voice low, "dangerous. Tell me you didn't." Kayla's breath hitched. Her eyes flickered between them, between the expectant, horrified stares of their parents, their friends. I didn't do anything." She shook her head. "It was just a mistake, Alex. Maybe someone else. The security cameras will tell the truth." That came from Harry's father, who stepped forward with a grim expression. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the fury brewing beneath the surface. "We have them all around the yard. It won't take long to check." Kayla went pale. Alexandra watched it happen. The moment Kayla realized there was no escape. The tension in the air was suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Kayla turned on Alexandra, her face contorted in rage. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You ruined everything. You made me into the villain. You stole my brother. You stole my parents. You stole my happiness. And now you're acting like the victim?" The words cut through Alexandra like a blade, but she didn't flinch. Before she could respond, Harry took a slow step forward. His voice was eerily steady. "You're not my sister anymore." Kayla flinched. I didn't mean to," but it was too late. From the corner of the yard, red and blue lights flashed against the dark sky. The wail of sirens filled the silence. The police had arrived. Kayla's breathing grew erratic as the flashing red and blue lights reflected off her pale face. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as the realization settled in. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just another one of Kayla's petty manipulations. This was attempted harm. Two uniformed officers stepped onto the patio, their expressions unreadable but firm. The taller one, Officer Daniels, addressed the group. "We received a call regarding a potential poisoning at this address." His gaze swept over the crowd before landing on Alexandra. "Can you confirm what happened, ma'am?" Alexandra's voice was tight, her hands still trembling from shock. I was served a plate of food by my sister-in-law, she began, her gaze never leaving Kayla's. She knew I had a severe allergy to shrimp, but before I could eat, my brother-in-law, Jamie, took the plate instead. Officer Daniels nodded. And he's the one who suffered the reaction? Harry stepped in, his voice cold. He's at the hospital right now. He almost died. The weight of his words sank in as Kayla let out a shaky breath. This is ridiculous, she sputtered, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was just food. You can't arrest me for food. Officer Daniels' partner, a woman with a sharp gaze, crossed her arms. Ma'am, food tampering is a criminal offense, especially if it results in harm. We'll need to review any security footage available. Harry's father stepped forward. We have cameras. The footage will show everything. At that, Kayla's face crumpled. Wait, please, she begged, stepping toward Harry, her hands trembling. You can't do this to me. I'm your sister. I'm pregnant, Harry. A stunned silence fell over the group. Alexandra's breath caught in her throat. Pregnant. But before she could process it, Harry took another step back, his expression unreadable. That doesn't change anything, he said, his voice colder than Alexandra had ever heard it. You tried to poison my wife. Kayla let out a strangled sob. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered, shaking her head violently. You weren't supposed to be with her. I tried to warn you. She's been turning you against me for years. I just wanted you to see. Alexandra's stomach churned. It was all so clear now. Kayla had never wanted a brother. She had wanted control. And when she lost it, she snapped. The officers exchanged a look before stepping forward. Kayla Dawson, you are under arrest for reckless endangerment and food tampering, Officer Daniels said as he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Kayla let out a wail as they grabbed her wrists. Harry, please, she shrieked, struggling against the officers. You can't let them do this to me. I'm your sister. I need you. Harry's expression didn't change. You stopped being my sister a long time ago. Kayla's screams were drowned out as she was dragged toward the police car. Alexandra could do nothing but watch as the woman who had tormented her for years was finally held accountable. And yet, despite everything, she felt no satisfaction, only relief. Because this time, Kayla couldn't hurt them anymore. The moment Kayla disappeared into the back of the police car, the tension in the backyard shattered like fragile glass. Alexandra let out a slow, unsteady breath, her pulse still pounding from the shock. Around her, hushed whispers filled the air as the guests tried to process what they had just witnessed. Harry stood beside her, rigid as stone, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes were locked on the squad car, but Alexandra knew he wasn't seeing it. He was lost somewhere deep in his mind, grappling with the reality that his own sister had tried to harm the woman he loved. His mother, Marilyn, was pale, gripping her husband's arm as though she might collapse. Oh my God, she whispered. My daughter. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Alexandra placed a hand on Harry's arm, grounding him. He finally tore his gaze away and turned to her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those beautiful warm eyes that had always been so full of love, were empty. She's gone, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. She's really gone. Alexandra swallowed the lump in her throat. She did this to herself, Harry. He exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. I know, but it doesn't make it any easier. A beat of silence passed between them before Harry's father. Richard stepped forward, his voice tight with restrained anger. We need to get to the hospital, he said. Jamie. At the mention of Jamie, a fresh wave of guilt crashed over Alexandra. Jamie had taken her plate. He had almost died because of her. She pressed a hand to her stomach, her heart aching. If things had gone differently, it could have been her and the baby fighting for life right now. Harry must have seen the distress on her face because he immediately cupped her cheek. Hey, don't go there. Alexandra's voice cracked. I should have. You did nothing wrong, he said firmly. Kayla did. She nodded, but the guilt still clawed at her insides. Richard cleared his throat. Let's go. They didn't waste any more time. The hospital was sterile and cold, the air thick with antiseptic and quiet murmurs. When they arrived, they were directed to Jamie's room, where Marilyn and Richard immediately rushed inside. Jamie lay in the hospital bed, his skin still pale. But he was awake. Alexandra exhaled in relief. Jamie! Marilyn rushed to his side, her eyes glassy with tears. Jamie gave a weak chuckle, his voice hoarse. Guess I should have skipped dinner. Huh? Richard let out a rough laugh, but there was no humor in it. You scared the hell out of us, son. Jamie looked toward Alexandra, his expression softening. You okay? Alexandra blinked, startled. He was the one in the hospital bed. Yet he was worried about her. I should be asking you that, she said, stepping closer. Jamie, I'm so sorry. For what? He frowned. She looked away. For giving you that plate. For letting this happen. Jamie shook his head. Alex, don't. That was not your fault. If anything, I'm glad it was me. If it had been you... His eyes flickered to her stomach, then back to her face. I don't even want to think about it. Harry's jaw tightened. She's in custody, he said bluntly. Jamie let out a long breath, sinking further into the pillows. Good. That's where she belongs. There was no anger in his voice, no hatred, just exhausted acceptance. Richard cleared his throat. The police will probably want to speak with you soon. But for now, just rest. Jamie nodded, closing his eyes briefly. As silence settled over the room, Alexandra laced her fingers through Harry's. He squeezed her hand gently, grounding her. No matter what came next, they had each other. And that was all that mattered. Days passed, and the reality of what had happened set in. The security footage had confirmed everything. Kayla had intentionally tampered with the food. Her lawyer attempted to claim emotional distress, pregnancy hormones, anything that might reduce her sentence. It didn't work. Jamie, still recovering, pressed charges. The prosecution built a strong case against her, painting her as a manipulative, dangerous woman with a history of obsessive behavior. Her trial was brutal. She cried in court, pleaded with the judge, begged her parents to save her. Marilyn and Richard watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. The moment of reckoning came when the judge delivered the verdict. Kayla Dawson, you are hereby sentenced to 6 years in prison. The gavel struck. It was over. Kayla let out a wail, turning desperately to her parents. Mom, Dad! Please, Marilyn's lips trembled, but she didn't move. Richard's voice was cold. This is the consequence of your actions. And just like that, the officers led her away. She turned one last time, her gaze locking onto Alexandra's. Pure hatred burned in her eyes. Then she was gone. Months later, Alexandra held her newborn daughter in her arms, her heart full of a love so fierce it nearly overwhelmed her. Harry sat beside her, brushing a finger over the baby's tiny hand. She's perfect, he whispered. Alexandra smiled through her tears. She is. Jamie stood at the foot of the hospital bed, a grin on his face. So, do I get to be the cool uncle? Harry snorted. Absolutely not. Everyone laughed. Despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they had made it through. Kayla was a distant memory now. Their family was whole, and they were finally at peace. The months that followed were a strange mix of healing and caution. Even with Kayla behind bars, Alexandra found it difficult to shake the anxiety that had rooted itself deep in her mind. She trusted no one outside of her inner circle, especially when it came to her daughter. Every bite of food she took was inspected twice. Every interaction with strangers analyzed. Harry noticed. You're still looking over your shoulder, he said one evening as they sat together in their living room, their daughter sleeping soundly in her crib nearby. Alexandra sighed, rubbing her hands together. I can't help it. Every time I think about what could have happened that night... Harry reached out, lacing his fingers through hers. She's gone. Alex, she can't hurt us anymore. She's locked up, but she's not gone, Alexandra corrected. She's still out there, still thinking of ways to make me pay for things I didn't do. Harry's jaw tightened. He had always been the logical one, the one who could compartmentalize, but even he had struggled to process that his own sister had tried to harm his wife and unborn child. He had spoken to Kayla's lawyer once. Out of curiosity, out of some lingering guilt he couldn't quite erase. The lawyer had only confirmed what he already knew. Kayla still blames Alexandra for everything, the lawyer had told him. She doesn't see what she did as wrong. She believes she was pushed into it. It was chilling but not surprising. So Harry understood why Alexandra couldn't let her guard down. Still, he had to try. We can't let her win, Alex, he said softly. If we live in fear, she still has power over us. Alexandra exhaled, squeezing his hand. I know, I need time. And so, she took it. Jamie became a regular presence in their lives. After finalizing his divorce from Kayla, he spent more time with Harry and Alexandra, grateful for their support. He had been through his own share of therapy, processing the realization that he had married a woman who was capable of such darkness. She fooled me too, he admitted one night as they sat around the dinner table. I thought I knew her, thought I could fix her. Alexandra gave him a sad smile. We all thought that at some point. He let out a hollow laugh. Yeah, well, I won't make that mistake again. Despite everything, Jamie had remained kind. He had moved into a new apartment, started dating again, and threw himself into work. He was determined not to let Kayla define his future. Alexandra admired that. She wished she could be that free. The letters started arriving 6 months later. At first, Alexandra didn't open them. They were from the prison, addressed to her, written in Kayla's familiar scrawl. The first time one arrived, Harry nearly ripped it in half before Alexandra stopped him. You don't have to read it, he told her. She doesn't deserve that space in your mind. Alexandra hesitated. I know, but I need to know what she wants. Harry's expression darkened, but he said nothing. So she read the first letter. It was long, rambling, and full of twisted justifications. Kayla wrote about how she felt abandoned, how she had always been an outcast, how Alexandra had stolen everything from her. But there was something else. She was still obsessed, still blaming, still waiting. One day you'll understand, Alexandra. One day you'll see why I did what I did. And when that day comes, I hope you'll forgive me. Because family always comes back to each other in the end. Alexandra's hands trembled as she finished reading. Harry took the letter from her, scanned it, then immediately tore it in half. She's delusional. His voice was tight with anger. Alexandra nodded, but a shiver ran down her spine. Kayla wasn't done with them. Even from behind bars, she was still trying to sink her claws into their lives. The final scene unfolded in a dimly lit prison cell. Kayla sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the single photograph she had been allowed to keep. It was an old one, years before everything had fallen apart. She and Harry stood side by side, smiling, their parents behind them, frozen in a moment of happiness that no longer existed. Her fingers traced Harry's face. Happy birthday, big brother, she whispered. Then she turned the photo over. On the back, in careful handwriting, she had written, This isn't over. Some betrayals run so deep that they leave scars no amount of time can heal. Kayla's obsession, her manipulations, and ultimately her attempt to harm Alexandra and her unborn child proved just how dangerous unchecked resentment can become. Even with her behind bars, the lingering shadow of her presence remains, a constant reminder that some people never truly let go of their hatred. What makes this story so terrifying isn't just the betrayal. It's the fact that Kayla never saw herself as the villain. She twisted reality in her mind, convinced that she was the victim, that Alexandra was the one who wronged her. And that mindset, it's the kind that never really goes away. So the question remains, was this truly the end of Kayla's reign of terror? Or is she simply biding her time, waiting for the moment to strike again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Kayla will find a way to get revenge, even from behind bars? What would you have done if you were in Alexandra's shoes? And if you want to see what happens next, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss part 2. You won't believe what happens next.